Thank you, David, for coming in and speaking. Personally, I think if anyone wants to get a 10-minute reduced version of what David is saying, it's on a website, which is where I became aware of it, RSA Animate, an animation of David Harvey explaining the crisis of capitalism. And I think it's just such a brilliant distillation of what's going on. Often the criticism that's been said about the Occupy movements is your analysis of what's going wrong may be accurate, but what are you actually going to do as a solution structurally? And from what I'm gathering from what you said, David, much of what has happened in the last 25 years, the Thatcherism, the liberalisation, the relaxing of laws which control how capital is accumulated. Do you see us being able to revert back to a stage which is more just or fairer, or do you think the whole thing has to be thrown out of the window totally? And what would you propose structurally could replace it, if that's not too much of a question to ask? David, did you? Yeah, it's free. Okay.
I've got very little time, but I'll be as brief as possible. We've seen here what a few hundred tents can do, but we also know this is a movement of thousands of people who have been here, and millions of people around the country support us. Imagine what we could do. My question is, how could we build a movement of millions to stop austerity, to stop neoliberalism? I have a few answers. Mine, I suggest maybe if we issued a call out, to say that we're going to occupy every school which is going to be closed, every youth centre, every hospital. If we issued this call out, we would have the support of millions of people around the country. And I think this is the most important question. How do we turn the hundreds or thousands into millions?
Actually, I agree with most of the points David made. Just, I got a question for David, because he said the Thatcherism is a main problem, and in the meantime it started with the capitalism as a systematic problems. My question is, shall we get rid of the Thatcherism, or shall get rid of the capitalism as a whole? That's my main question. Yeah. And then it's, of course, I think it's a good idea if we develop this occupation and strike and continuation of this kind of movement, and we have to do it wherever it's possible locally, without hierarchy and without leader. What do you think, David?
Okay, very quickly. Yes, we need to deal with capitalism, but actually if you look at the options which are out there in terms of what the capitalist class is proposing, they only have one solution, and that's austerity, and that is, if you like, the perpetuation and end game of Thatcherism. And so to end Thatcherism is in fact to end the options for capitalism. That is the position I would take. And by the way, in an interesting sort of just tactical point, it's very good to have a figure that you're going to get rid of. And it's the dame and everything that she stands for and the shadow of what she created that needs to be gotten rid of, in exactly the same way in the United States. We need to get rid of the shadow of Reagan, and in Chile they need to get rid of the shadow of Pinochet. And what we're seeing right now is the shadow of all of these people is maintained long after they're gone. I mean, look at the situation in Egypt. In Egypt, okay, they got rid of a dictator, and hasn't things really changed that much? South Africa, they got rid of apartheid. Have they got rid of economic apartheid? No. So in effect, what we're seeing is a situation in which we got to have some sort of way of focusing what it is that we want to do, and then in going after that, we will certainly arrive at the point where capital accumulation cannot continue without the austerity, without the Thatcherite kind of response.
I've got a question. It's more to do with a working group which has recently been formed about about the Occupy movement globally taking patents for ideas and inventions that can be used for clean energy, can be used for water purification systems. And I was wondering whether David Harvey would be willing to help us build some of those links and spread that idea so we can open source these technologies so that no matter how much money you have access to that knowledge.
Dr. Harvey, you've written before about the individualization of society, or maybe the atomization of society and of political movements as well. How do we assure that this movement does not become too atomized, that people can stay strong in their solidarity with one another? Thank you.
Yeah. I found it surprising that you said that we should try and create a movement that can force somebody in power to do something that's more like we want. As opposed, do you not think that we are able of creating a movement that is fully democratic, that we can do things for ourselves? Similarly, I was surprised that you were saying that we need to force capital to take on the externalities. I don't think capital is going to do that. So yes, we should try and force it, and we'll win some great things while doing that. But we've got to force it while being aware that we're only going to be able to force it that far. And at the same time, we've got to be creating our own alternative forms of power. Yeah, what do you think about that?
I think the alternative forms of power are crucial, absolutely crucial, no question about it. But at some point or other, you have to look to creating forms of organization that, unfortunately, look somewhat like a state. Now, you may not like that, but you have to do it. And there are some issues that need to be covered in, I think, a different organizational form than those which are often being proposed in movements of this sort. These are what we call tightly coupled systems. For example, you don't want to have an assembly of air traffic controllers having a discussion over whether planes should turn left or right. You want a tightly coupled system of authority and structures that actually organizes things. And if a nuclear power station goes on the blink, you don't call an assembly like this and have a discussion for 2 days as to what to do about it. You can't do that. So to the degree that our society has a lot of these what I call tightly coupled systems, we need to invent democratic ways of managing and organizing those tightly coupled systems so that they can work in a way to the benefit of all rather than to the benefit of very few people. And this means that some organizational form is required that actually has a hierarchical structure rather than a horizontal kind of structure. Now, right now, there is a tremendous interest in increasing the horizontality of organizational forms. And I think that's terrific and it's great, but you've got to understand there are certain limits to how horizontality can actually work in certain situations, and that therefore you have to think of, and this is what the social movements in, say, Bolivia teach you, is that it's a mixture of hierarchy and horizontality, and that somehow or other bringing that all together into a certain kind of mix. I mean, this is a grand experiment you're embarking on, and I don't have the answers as to how to stop it breaking down into individualism and all the rest of it. That is, you know, what we all have to do, or try to do. I have no magic answer. If I had a magic answer, I'd wave the wand and there we go, you know. I mean, it would be great. Now, putting demands on the state. One of the ways in which I think we can actually get the state to disappear is precisely to put demands on it that it cannot fulfill. And it seems to me that that is where the negotiation with the state. I'm not myself in favor of the idea that somehow or other forgetting about the state can actually make things work. It produces a certain kind of political set of political possibilities which are very important, but at some point or other you see what the state can do with its police power, with its military apparatus, with its organizational form. That has to be dismantled somehow. And the only way to dismantle it, it seems to me, is to actually put demands on the state that force it to dismantle it, so that actually the kind of popular power you're talking about has room to flourish. Otherwise, you'll find yourself locked into sort of small spaces and kept under wrap and key unless you go that way. So my feeling about the organizational form is, I think, very important to say, you've got to think about the nature of the problem you are addressing, and then think about what is the organizational form that can actually take on that problem. And something like global warming, if you look at something of that sort, and you say, what is the organizational form that could solve that problem? And just to the brother who talked about, the new technologies and so on, I think the new technologies and environmental technologies are very important. But I think actually something more fundamental is involved in the environmental issue. That is, the environmental issue cannot be solved with pure technological changes. It has to be about changing lifestyles. It has to be about changing urban structures. It has to be about changing social relations. In other words, there is no single bullet kind of solution that says, hey, this technology or that technology is going to solve it. It has to be a broad-based social approach to these environmental questions.